You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Well, happy Tuesday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That is ODYSY1.com. Come on over and see all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio. At the same time, you can be listening and watching this broadcast over on YouTube in video format as the simulcast to this audio show. Boy, I worded that badly. It's going to be one of those kind of days, I think. But come on over, view the simulcast, join the live chat room with the other Intrepids that's going on right now over at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. You'd think I'd get a more romanticized feel to the opener of my show, but that's pretty much it. Just try to let you know where you are, where you can find us, what you're listening to. Tonight we're going to continue on our look at different stories, and I'm not talking about storybook stories. I'm talking about stories, accounts, events that took place in the conquering of the American West and the subjugation of the Native American tribes that lived here. And we were talking about Kit Carson and the Navajo yesterday. We're going to pick up and probably wrap that story up tonight. Before I do, I just want to mention, you know, I'm wearing a shirt, and if you're looking in the video, it's not pressed, so forgive me for that. Now, I'm not, I'm a neatnik to a certain point, a certain degree, but I've always liked a well-pressed shirt. Even if I'm wearing it untucked with a pair of jeans, I roll up the sleeves. I like there to be a nice crease in the sleeve, you know, and I like to have the collar crisp, and I used to, when I was in business and advertising, I would take all my dress shirts, because I wore a suit and tie or a shirt and pants and tie and suspenders, you know, braces we called them, into advertising in the studio, and I would send my shirts out to the cleaners, and I'd have a batch of shirts every week I'd send out, and I said, you know, put them on hangers, heavy starch in the cuffs and the collars, and down the front placket. That's the way I like my shirts to look. And I've pretty much kept up with that over the years. I like a well-pressed shirt. Today, I could not press this shirt. And so I've been wearing it unpressed all day, mostly because I haven't run into anybody until I realize, and I'm looking at myself on my own monitor, that my shirt is a bit disheveled looking. That's because Rainey bought some new bookshelves for the office here, and she's got everything just pulled out. It's all over. If you could see beyond this computer, all sides of me, behind me, everywhere in here is stacked up, and it's unbelievable. As a matter of fact, I'm going to show you something. You want to see this? This is great for just you audio people only. But here's my office as it looks at the present moment. I don't even know if I can turn this enough, because there's so much stuff. Look at this. Oh, see, there it goes. I knocked something over. Oh, it was my pipes. My pipe collection, which sits on the shelves over there, are now behind the computer. So you get an idea. My office is a disaster, and somewhere buried in here is the iron to iron my shirt. It usually sits on the shelf down below on the other side of this desk. Can't even get at it. Books, heavy book boxes and shelves and everything crammed all over everywhere. So it's a mess in here today. It drives me insane. I have to get myopic. I have to focus on what I'm doing because I can't do things in a mess. I can't sit and draw pictures in a mess. I can't write in a mess. Can't do radio in a mess. And then I feel disheveled on top of it because I couldn't iron my shirt. There you go. That's what's going on with me today. So hopefully that doesn't sound too neurotic for most of you. I like a good pressed shirt. That's all. And, you know, even if you know you're putting wrinkles in it the first hour you're wearing it, it's okay. It starts off great. So, all right. So forgive my little foray into neatnickishness. It's only because I saw myself in the monitor and I saw the condition of my shirt. So pardon me for that. Look at that. I hate when the placket folds under and stuff like that. Okay, enough on that. Let's get into our studies today. Now, I hope you're enjoying this. And there's two sides to that coin. By enjoying it, I mean enjoying the, if you will, the entertainment value of it, meaning you're listening to a show. It's kind of a classroom setting on this show. You know, it's not as wild and crazy as my show I do with Rocky. We get more serious in here. Enjoying it, the flip side of that is it's hard to enjoy, from a visceral standpoint, history that is sad and moving and heart-wrenching at times. And so I hope you see this two-sided coin with these shows we're doing, is that you get the entertainment value and that you enjoy the presentation of the facts. I'm not showing a lot of pictures. I could do that as well for those of you who are watching the video. That does nothing for the radio audience. And so, at the same time, I hope that you understand the depth of what I'm presenting. This is our history. History is amoral, meaning there is no morals to history. There may be morals to the people who write the history, and I believe that's why D. Brown wrote his book, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, and other books you'll find. It's the other side of the story that was written by the conquerors. Because when you have events that took place in Native America with the expansion of the American West into the American West, you have battles out of massacres, a war out of suppression. These things were called these things by the victors, the United States of America. Are there atrocities in our past? Yeah, there are. We've done some awful things to build to where we are now. The thing that we've got on our hands now, however, is something that ended 120 years ago, with the 110 years ago, with the subjugation of the Native American tribes. So now this land exists as it does. We were born here, all of us that live here. Well, unless you moved here. We're Americans. This is our country. This is Native Americans' country as well. Their ancestors lost it to our ancestors. Our ancestors outgunned them and did terrible things to them, nearly wiped them off the map, and pushed who was left onto sad, sorry pieces of crap land as their reservations. Some of them are very beautiful places, but you take the Plains Indians and push them onto the dusty old Bosque Redondo down in New Mexico, and you get the idea. So all of this took place in our past, and we all live now in the here and the now. What can we do now? We're all in this together, as they say, meaning we're all descendants of people who either pushed atrocity or experienced atrocity. Is the founding of our nation invalid, then? Perhaps some of the westward expansion is, but it exists today, and undoing that is not even a point that you can talk about. But what we can talk about is how we work together as people who are all citizens of this country now. And that's another topic. I'm going into that without really thinking about what I'm saying on that, but you get the idea. And so looking at this history, I think, is a strong reminder to us of where we came from, how we got where we are now, and how what we have now was something that was earned on the backs and the blood of atrocities committed against the native peoples who were on this land. We stole it from them. And of course, all through history, you can see examples of this. So, can a nation so founded continue to exist? Only if they continue to live in that paradigm. That was over a century ago. And so there are prejudices against Native American people like there are prejudices against black people who came from the slave movement. So I understand all of the issues that are going on in our current politics. I get them. It's how you carry out, how you move forward, how you go from there is the question. So let me push that aside because I'm trying to hold back getting too political about this and getting too much information out there. Let's look at the stories and let them speak for themselves. And you can determine in your own heart and mind what you think of everything that has gone on here. And we left off yesterday. Kit Carson was appointed by General Carlton to pursue the Navajo. And he continued this steady destruction of grain fields, of beans, pumpkin patches, food supplies, food chains. But it was really too slow for General Carlton. And Carlton just wanted the land and they wanted the minerals beneath, the gold and so on. And in September, Carlton of that year, 1862, Carlton ordered that thenceforth every Navajo male was to be killed or taken prisoner on sight. These are the orders put out. Why? As they're saying they're hostile to us. Well, why are they hostile toward you? What did you do to them to push them to that place? They've all just said, all the chiefs of the Navajo said, we just want to live in peace on our land. And they're driven off their land. They're killed. You remember what happened with the horse race scenario in yesterday's presentation? And they just start killing them. And so he ordered that every Navajo male was to be killed or taken prisoner on sight. And he wrote out for Carson these words, and we covered this a little bit yesterday, but this is in recap. General Carlton said to Carson, say to the Navajo, go to the Bosque Redondo, or we will pursue and destroy you. We will not make peace with you on any other terms. This war shall be pursued against you if it takes years, now that we've begun, until you cease to exist or move. There can be no other talk on this subject. Listen to the language from one of our generals of the United States Army. This war will continue until you cease to exist or have moved to the Bosque Redondo. And that's it. He said, that's the line in the sand. And about the same time, the general was writing in the War Department headquarters in Washington, and he was demanding additional soldiers, additional regiment of cavalry. And his prerequisite for writing that was telling the people in Washington, there's gold for the picking up. It's laying around our feet. We just need to clear these people off the land. And so under Carlton's obsessive prodding, Kit Carson accelerated his scorched earth program. And by autumn, he had destroyed most of the herds and the grain between Fort Canby and Canyon de Chelly. And on October 17th, 2 Navajo appeared under a truce flag at Fort Wingate. They had a white flag, and they came. And one of them was El Sordo, the emissary for his brothers Delgadito and Barboncito. We mentioned them yesterday. And their 500 followers. And their food supply was gone, El Sordo said, and they were reduced to eating piñon nuts. And they were almost naked of clothing and blankets, and they were too fearful of the soldiers' scouting parties to build fires for warmth, and they didn't wish to go far away to the Bosque, but would build hogans nearby Fort Wingate, where they would always be under the eyes of the soldiers as peaceful Indians. This was their capitulation. And in 9 days, Delgadito and Barboncito would come with 500 people to resettle and build their hogans outside the precincts of the fort. The chiefs would be willing to go to Santa Fe to see the Star Chief and sue for peace. And Captain Rafael Chacon, he was commanding Fort Wingate, posted the compromise offer to General Carleton, who replied, "The Navajo Indians have no choice in the matter. They must come in and go to the Bosque Redondo or remain in their own country at war." Boom. He gave them nothing. He would not concede. He would not compromise on this at all. So having no choice in the matter and burdened with women and children suffering from cold and starvation, Delgadito surrendered. Barboncito, El Sordo, and many other warriors waited in the mountains to see what would happen to their people. And those who had surrendered were sent to the Bosque Redondo. But Carleton arranged for the first captives to be given special treatment, the best rations, the best shelters, and on the journey and upon the arrival at the Bosque, and forbidding as it was on that barren plain on the Picos, Delgadito was impressed by the kindness of his captors. So when the Star Chief informed him that he could return to Fort Wingate with his family if he would persuade other Navajo leaders that life at the Bosque was better than starvation and freezing, Delgadito agreed to go. And at the same time, the general ordered Kit Carson to invade Canyon de Chelly and to destroy food and livestock and kill or capture the Navajos in that last stronghold. So in preparation for the Chelly campaign, Carson assembled a pack herd to carry supplies. But on December 13th, Barboncito and his warriors, they swooped down on the herd. They ran the mules off in the canyon, where they could be used as winter meat supply. And Carson sent 2 detachments of soldiers in pursuit, but the Navajos divided into several small parties. They escaped under the cover of a heavy snowstorm. Now, Lieutenant Deacon Donaciano Montoya, cavalryman who killed my father, prepared to die. Donaciano Montoya. His cavalrymen stumbled across a small camp of Navajo. They charged it, and they drove the Navajo into the cedars. And they captured 13 women and children. And the lieutenant reported, quote, "Indian was shot through the right side, but succeeded in escaping through the tangled underwood. His son, a little boy of 10 years old and very intelligent for an Indian, was taken a short time afterwards, and reported that his father died amongst the rocks in a neighboring arroyo." So, with no mules for packing supplies, Kit Carson now informed General Carleton that Canyon de Chelly expedition would have to be delayed. The general promptly replied, "You will not delay the expedition on account of lack of transportation. You will have the men carry their blankets, and if necessary, 3 or 4 days' rations and haversacks." So, this is Carleton. This is how what's the word I want to look for? How persistent he was, aggressive he was in moving those Navajo out. He moved his soldiers in, even if they didn't have transportation, on foot. Go in, take 4 days' rations, go in, push them out. So on January 6th of 1864, the soldiers marched out of Fort Canby. Captain Albert Pfeiffer led a small force, which was to enter the east end of Canyon de Chelly, and Kit Carson led a larger force, which was to enter at the west end. And 6 inches of snow lay on the ground, temperature was below freezing, and marching was slow. Could you imagine being one of those cavalrymen? Or those American soldiers? So a week later, Pfeiffer entered the canyon, and from rims and ledges, hundreds of half-starved Navajos hurled stones, pieces of wood, Spanish curses upon the heads of the soldiers. Could you imagine the situation these people were in, these Navajo? This is how they're fighting, and this is all they have. This is their home. And they're throwing rocks down on the soldiers. This is all they've got left. They couldn't stop them, though. Pfeiffer's men destroyed Hogan's, the homes that the Navajo built. Kind of like little adobe type of huts, these Hogans. And the men destroyed the Hogans. They destroyed the food caches. And they destroyed the livestock that they had. They killed 3 Navajo who came within range of their muskets. They found 2 elderly Navajo frozen to death and captured 19 women and children. Carson, meanwhile, had established a camp at the west end and was scouting the canyon from the rims. And on January 12th, one of his patrol encountered a band of Navajos, killing 11 of them. So 2 days later, 2 commands linked up. The entire canyon had been traversed without a major fight. That evening, 3 Navajos approached the soldiers' camp under a truce flag. Their people were starving and freezing, they told Carson. They chose to surrender rather than die. "You have until tomorrow morning," Carson replied. "After that time, my soldiers will hunt you down." The next morning, 60 ragged and emaciated Navajos arrived at the camp and surrendered. Now, before returning to Fort Canby, Carson ordered complete destruction of Navajo properties within the canyon, including their fine peach orchards, more than 5,000 peach trees destroyed. The Navajo could forgive the rope thrower for fighting them as a soldier, for making prisoners of them, even for destroying their food supplies, but the one act they never forgave Carson for was the cutting down of their beloved peach tree orchards. During the next few weeks, as news of the soldiers' entry into the Canyon de Chelly spread through the hidden camps of the Navajo, the people absolutely lost heart. "We fought for that country because we did not want to lose it," Manuelito said afterward. "We lost nearly everything. The American nation is too powerful for us to fight. When we had to fight for a few days, we felt fresh, but in a short time we were worn out and the soldiers starved us out." On January 31st, Delgadito, with his reassurances of conditions at the Bosque Redondo, persuaded 680 more Navajo to surrender at Fort Wingate. Severe winter weather and lack of food forced the others to come into Fort Canby. And by mid-February, 1,200 of them were there, hungry and destitute. The army issued them scanty rations, and the very old and the very young began to die. And on February 21st, Herrero Grande came in with his band, and the numbers rose to 1,500. By early March, 3,000 had surrendered at both forts, and the trails to the north were filled with fearful Navajo approaching the frozen snow, over the frozen snow. And but the Rico chiefs, Manuelito, Barbancito, and Armillo, refused to quit. And with their people, they stayed in the mountains, still determined to not surrender. This was their home. What would you do? And during March, the long walk of the Navajo from Fort Sumner and the Bosque Redondo to Fort Sumner and the Bosque Redondo was set in motion, and the first contingent of 1,430 reached Fort Sumner on March 13th. 10 died en route. 3 children were kidnapped, probably by the Mexicans, among the soldier escort. Meanwhile, a second group of 2,400 had left Fort Canby, and their numbers were already reduced by 126 who had died at the fort. And the long caravan included 30 wagons, 3,000 sheep, 473 horses, and the Navajo had the fortitude to bear freezing weather, hunger, dysentery, jeers of the soldiers, and the hard 300-mile journey, but they could not bear the homesickness and the loss of their land. They wept, and 197 of them died before they ever reached the Bosque Redondo. We got to stop there for this first half. Sit tight. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad, so he can take me to Disneyland.
All right, folks, welcome back to the show. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. And you can find them over at odysy1.com. And you are hopefully listening to the video simulcast of this show, watching it, I should say, and joining in the chat room, the live chat room where everybody's discussing this show and other things. It's a chat room, and it's inhabited by the Intrepids, faithful followers of this show. Come on over, join the chat. You can watch the video broadcast of this, as well as listen to it on Odyssey Radio. And that's over at my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Now, we left off at a place where we're going to pick right back up. We're talking about, if you weren't here for the first segment and you're hearing the second segment, talking about Kit Carson, who is playing a bit of a role in this, but lessening as we go on through the story, and the subjugation and the eventual surrender of most of the Navajo, who they're moving to the Bosque Redondo reservation. And we ended by talking about how so many died en route, nearly 200 of them. And on March 20th of 1863, 800 more Navajo left Fort Canby. Most of them were women and children and old men. The Army supplied them only 23 wagons. This is for 800 people. 23 wagons. On the second day's march, the officer in command reported a very severe snowstorm set in, which lasted for 4 days with unusual severity, and occasional great suffering amongst the Indians, many of whom were nearly naked and, of course, unable to withstand such a storm. When they reached Los Pinos, below Albuquerque, the Army commandeered the wagons for other uses, and the Navajo had to camp in the open. And by the time the journey could be resumed, several children had vanished. At this place, a lieutenant commented, officers who have Indians in charge will have to exercise extreme vigilance, or the Indians' children will be stolen from them and sold. And many of these people kidnapping these children were the Mexican soldiers that were part of the United States Army. They were kind of the fencers, so to speak, of children. And this contingent reached the Bosque Redondo on May 11th, 1864. I left Canby with 800 and received 146 en route to Fort Sumner, making about 946 in all. Of this number, about 110 died, was what was reported. So late in April, one of the holdout chiefs, Armijo, appeared at Fort Canby and informed the post commander, Captain Asa Carey, that Manuelito would arrive in a few days with Navajo, who had spent the winter far to the north along the Little Colorado and the San Juan. Armijo's band of more than 400 came in a few days later, but Manuelito halted his people a few miles away at a place called Quelitas, and he sent a messenger to inform the soldier chief that he'd like to have a talk with him before he brings everybody in. And so during the parley which followed, Manuelito said that his people wished to stay near the fort. They want to plant their grain crops. They want to graze their sheep as they had always done. We won't cause trouble. Just let us stay here, near the fort on our own land. There is but one place for you, Captain Carey replied, and that is to go to the Bosque Redondo. Why must we go to the Bosque? Manuelito asked. We've never stolen. We've never murdered. We've at all times kept the peace we promised General Canby. And he added that his people feared that they were being collected at the Bosque so the soldiers could shoot them down. This is a real fear they had. And that they would shoot them down as they had at Fort Fauntleroy in 1861. And Carey assured him that this was not the case. But Manuelito said he would not surrender his people until he had talked with his old friend Herrero Grande, or some of the other Navajo leaders who had been at the Bosque. So when General Carleton heard that there was a chance of Manuelito surrendering, he sent 4 carefully chosen Navajo from the Bosque, but not Herrero Grande, as Manuelito had requested. And so to use their influence on the reluctant war chief. And they did not convince Manuelito. One June night after they'd talked, Manuelito and his band vanished from Quilitas, and they went back to their hiding places along the Little Colorado. Now in September, he heard that his old ally Barboncito had been captured in the Canyon de Chalet, and now he, Manuelito, was the last of the Rico holdouts, and he knew the soldiers would be looking everywhere for him. So during the autumn, the Navajos who had escaped from the Bosque Redondo began returning to their homeland with frightening accounts of what was happening to the people there. It was a wretched land, they said. The soldiers prodded them with bayonets, herded them into adobe-walled compounds where soldier chiefs were always counting them and putting numbers down in little books. What does that sound like to you? Remember, the Nazis tattooed the Jews in concentration camps. The soldier chiefs promised them clothing and blankets and better food, but their promises were never kept. This stuff never showed up. All the cottonwood and mesquite had been cut down so that only roots were left for firewood. To shelter themselves from rain and the sun, they had to dig holes in the sandy ground and cover and line them with mats of woven grass. They lived like prairie dogs in burrows. And with a few tools the soldiers gave them, they broke the soil of the Pecos bottomlands and planted grain. But floods and droughts and insects killed the crops, and now everyone was on half rations. Crowded together, as they were, disease began to take toll of the weaker ones. It was a bad place. And although escape was difficult and dangerous under the watchful eyes of the soldiers, many were risking their lives to just get away. Meanwhile, Star Chief Carleton had persuaded the Vicario of Santa Fe to sing a Te Deum in celebration of the Army's successful removal of the Navajo to the Bosque. And the general was described the place to his superiors in Washington as a fine reservation. There's no reason why they, the Navajo, will not be the most happy and prosperous and well-provided for Indians in the United States. At all events, we can feed them cheaper than we can fight them. He's describing the same place where there was all this hardship we just talked about. So in the eyes of the Star Chief, his prisoners were only mouths and bodies. These 6,000 mouths must eat, and these 6,000 bodies must be clothed. When it is considered what a magnificent pastoral and mineral country they have surrendered to us, the United States, a country whose value can hardly be estimated, the mere pittance, in comparison, which must at once be given to support them, sinks into insignificance as a price for their natural heritage. This is Carleton. This is the United States. And no advocate of the manifest destiny ever phrased his support of that philosophy more unctuously than he. He said, "The exodus of this whole people from the land of their fathers is not only an interesting but a touching sight. They have fought us gallantly for years on. They have defended their mountains and their stupendous canyons with a heroism which any people might be proud to emulate. But when, at length, they found it was their destiny too, as it had been that of their brethren, tribe after tribe, away back toward the rising of the sun, to give way to the insatiable progress of our race, they threw down their arms. And as brave men entitled to our admiration and respect have come to us with confidence in our magnanimity, and feeling that we are too powerful and too just a people to repay that confidence with meanness or neglect, feeling that having sacrificed to us their beautiful country, their homes, the associations of their lives, the scenes rendered classic in their traditions, we will not dole out to them a miser's pittance in return for what they know to be and what we know to be a pricely realm." Did you hear all that bullshit? This is what Carleton said of his campaign to remove the Navajo off their land. Now, Manuelito had not thrown down his arms. He was too important a chief for General Carleton to permit such incorrigibility to continue unchallenged, and in February of 1865, now, just to put it in a historical context, this is a couple of months before Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, Navajo runners from Fort Wingate brought Manuelito a message from the Star Chief, a warning that he and his band would be hunted down to the death unless they came in peaceably before spring. "I'm doing no harm to anyone," Manuelito told the messengers. "I will not leave my country. I intend to die here." But he finally agreed to talk again with some of the chiefs who were at the Bosque Redondo. So in late February, Grande and 5 other Navajo leaders from the Bosque arranged to meet Manuelito near the Zuni trading post. You hear it coming? The weather was cold, the land was covered with deep snow. After embracing his old friends, Manuelito led them back into the hills where his people were hidden. Only about 100 men, women, and children were left of Manuelito's band. They had few horses and a few sheep. "Here is all I have in the world," Manuelito said. "See what trifling amount. You see how poor they are. My children are eating palmilla roots." After a pause, he added that his horses were in no condition to travel to the Bosque. Herrero replied that he had no authority to extend the time set for him to surrender, and he warned Manuelito in a friendly way that he would be risking the lives of his people if he did not come in and surrender. Manuelito wavered. He said he would surrender for the sake of the women and children. Then he added that he would need 3 months to get his livestock in order. Finally, he declared flatly that he could not leave his country. "My God and my mother live in the West, and I will not leave them. It's a tradition of my people that we must never cross the 3 rivers, the Grande, the San Juan, the Colorado. Nor could I leave the Chuska Mountains. I was born there. I shall remain. I have nothing to lose but my life, and that they can come and take whenever they please. But I will not move. I have never done any wrong to the Americans or the Mexicans. I have never robbed. If I am killed, innocent blood will be shed." Those were the words of Manuelito. Now Herrero said to him, "I've done all I could do for your benefit. I've given you the best advice. I now leave you as if your grave were already made." These are recorded words of these people. That was said by Herrero, his friend. So in Santa Fe, a few days later, Grande informed General Carleton of Manuelito's defiant stand. Carleton's response was a harsh order to the commander at Fort Wingate. Quote, "I understand if Manuelito could be captured, his band would doubtless come in, and that if you could make certain arrangements with the Indians of the Zuni village, where he frequently comes on a visit to trade, they would cooperate with you in his capture. Try hard to get Manuelito. Have him securely ironed and carefully guarded. It will be a mercy to others whom he controls to capture or kill him at once. I prefer he should be captured. If he attempts to escape, shoot him down." But Manuelito was too clever to fall into Carleton's trap at Zuni, and he managed to avoid capture through the spring and summer of 1865. So late in the summer, Barboncito and several of his warriors escaped from the Bosque Redondo. They were said to be in the Apache country of Sierra de Escudero, and so many Navajo were slipping away from the reservation that Carleton posted permanent guards for 40 miles around Fort Sumner. And in August, the general ordered the post commander to kill every Navajo found setting a foot off the reservation without a pass. And when the Bosque's grain crops failed again in the autumn of 1865, the Army issued the Navajos meal flour and bacon, which had been condemned as unfit for the soldiers to eat. Deaths began to rise again, and so did the number of attempted escapes. Although General Carleton was being openly criticized now by the New Mexicans for conditions at the Bosque Redondo, he continued to hunt down Navajo. And at last, on September 1st of 1866, the chief he wanted most, Manuelito, limped into Fort Wingate with 23 beaten warriors and surrendered. They were all in rags. Their bodies were emaciated. They still wore leather bands on their wrists for protection from the slaps of bowstrings. But they had no war bows, no arrows. One of Manuelito's arms hung useless at his side from a wound. A short time later, Barboncito came in with 21 followers and surrendered for the second time. Now there were no more war chiefs. Ironically, only 18 days after Manuelito surrendered, General Carleton was removed from the command of the Army's Department of New Mexico. The Civil War, which had brought Star Chief Carleton to power, had been over for more than a year, and the New Mexicans had had enough of him and his pompous ways. So when Manuelito arrived at the Bosque Redondo, a new superintendent was there, A.B. Norton. The superintendent examined the soil on the reservation and pronounced it unfit for cultivation of grain, because of the presence of alkali in the soil. The water is black and brackish, scarcely bearable to the taste, and said by the Indians to be unhealthy, because 1/4 of their population had been swept off by disease. The reservation, Norton added, had cost the government millions of dollars. The sooner it's abandoned and the Indians removed, the better. I've heard it suggested there was a speculation at the bottom of it. Do you expect an Indian to be satisfied and contented, deprived of the common comforts of life, without which a white man would not be contented anywhere? Would any sensible man select a spot for a reservation for 8,000 Indians where the water is scarcely bearable, where the soil is poor and cold, and where the mesquite roots 12 miles distant are the only wood for the Indians to use? If they remain on this reservation, they must always be held there by force and not from choice. Oh, let them go back, or take them to where they can have good, cool water to drink, wood plenty to keep them from freezing to death, and where the soil will produce something for them to eat. This is A.B. Norton, the new superintendent of the Bosque Redondo. And so for 2 years, a steady stream of investigators and officials from Washington paraded through the reservation. Some were genuinely compassionate, some were mainly concerned with reducing expenses. Oh, we were there for a few years, Manuelito remembered. Many of our people died from the climate. People from Washington held a council with us. He explained how the whites punished those who disobeyed the law. We promised to obey the laws if we were permitted to go back to our own country. We promised to keep the treaty. We promised 4 times to do so. We all said yes to the treaty, and he gave us good advice. He was General Sherman. When the Navajo leaders first saw the great warrior Sherman, they were fearful of him because his face was the same as Star Chief Carleton's, fierce and hairy, with a cruel mouth. But his eyes were different, the eyes of a man who had suffered and knew the pain of it in others. We told him we would try to remember what he said, Manuelito recalled. He said, I want all you people to look at me. And he stood up for us to see him. He said, if we would do right, we could look people in the face. Then he said, my children, I will send you back to your homes. And before they could leave, the chiefs had to sign the new treaty, June 1st of 1868, which began, from this day forward, all war between the parties to this agreement shall forever cease. Barboncito signed first, then Armijo, then Delgadito, then Manuelito, and Herrera Grande, and 7 others. The nights and days were long before it came time for us to go to our homes, Manuelito said. The day before we were to start, we went a little way toward home because we were so anxious to start. We came back and the Americans gave us a little stock, and we thanked them for that. We told the drivers to whip the mules, we were in such a hurry. And when we saw the top of the mountain from Albuquerque, we wondered if it was our mountain, and we felt like talking to the ground. We loved it so. And some of the old men and women cried with joy when they reached their homes. And there's a Navajo song that was sung after this. And so the Navajos came home. When the new reservation lines were surveyed, much of their best pasture land was taken away for white settlers. Life wouldn't be easy. They would have to struggle to endure, bad as it was. The Navajo would come to know that they were the least unfortunate of all the Western Indians. For the others, the ordeal had hardly begun. And they sing this song, and I can't sing it as an Indian, as a Native American, Wakankang, the hey hunka, and I can't sing it. I'm not trained in that, but it said, in a sacred manner I live. To the heavens I gazed. In a sacred manner I live. My horses are many. So that was really the end of the roundup of the Navajo, pushed into the Bosque Redondo, then eventually by Sherman allowed to go back home under very strict reservation. And it ceased the war between them. You had a man who had, Sherman isn't a stellar example through all of the Indian wars, if you will, but he is somebody who had some compassion for these people. And that's where they ended up till today. And the Bosque Redondo, by the way, which we'll talk about more at another time, the Bosque Redondo was the place where I've already mentioned that they found in the 1960s, 100 years later, they discovered that the reason for the brackish water, the reason people were getting sick, the reason people couldn't plant food there, the reason the water was undrinkable was because it sat on the largest deposit, or I think it was the second largest deposit of uranium in all of North America. Is beneath the Bosque Redondo. And once that was discovered, once we started entering the nuclear age, guess what happened? The United States wanted to take the Bosque Redondo back 100 years after that treaty. And the Indians fought it. They said, no, this is ours. You gave it to us in perpetuity. We're going to profit off of the uranium that's beneath the ground. And I am curious, because I don't have these facts in front of me at the moment. I'm going to see if there is still, I believe I had heard that this was not even settled yet. Uranium Solution Mining Project, the McKinley County, Crow Point. The Navajo blaze new tourist trails out west. This is interesting. This is from the New York Times. Oh, damn it, which I can't read because you have to sign up for them. But we'll find a little bit more. I'll tell you what's gone on with the Bosque Redondo. Probably tomorrow. I'll look that up and see where that case eventually ended up. But I know they fought it for years. The government tried to steal this land from them. And this really leads us into kind of the next section. The next story, called Little Crow's War. In 1862, now we're going back another 6 years again, General Grant defeated the Confederates in the Battle of Shiloh. May 6th, Henry D. Thoreau dies at age 45. May 20th, the Congress passes Homestead Act, granting 160 acres of western land to settlers at $1.25 per acre. And don't you wish you could get that kind of acreage nowadays? But of course, it was Indian land. July 2nd, Congress passes the Morrill Act for creation of land-grant colleges. July 10th, the construction of the Union Pacific Railroad begins. August 30th, this is all 1862, the Union Army defeated in the Second Battle of Bull Run. September 17th, Confederate Army defeated at Antietam. September 22nd, Lincoln declares all slaves free from January 1st, 1863, in the Emancipation Proclamation. In October 13th, in Germany, Bismarck delivers Blood and Iron speech. December 13th, the Union Army suffers severe losses. Defeat at Fredericksburg. The nation is plunged into gloom. Some army units near mutiny as they go into the winter quarters. December 29th, General Sherman is defeated at the Chickasaw Bayou. Victor Hugo's Les Miserables and Turnagev's... you'd think I could say this. I've said it a million times. Turgenev's Fathers and Sons was published. And this is the era we're now entering for this next... Well, it's all really took place during the Civil War period, the things that we're talking about. In 1863, April 2nd, the Bread Riot in Richmond, Virginia took place. May 2nd through the 4th, the Confederates win a victory at Chancellorsville. July 1st through the 3rd, the Union Army defeats Confederates at Gettysburg. July 4th, Vicksburg falls to Grant's army. July 11th, drafting of soldiers for Union Army begins. And it goes on and on and on. And then you've got Wamditunka, Big Eagle of the Santee Sioux said this, and this is where we end tonight. The whites were always trying to make the Indians give up their life and live like white men. Go to farming, work hard and do as they did. And the Indians did not know how to do that. And did not want to anyway. If the Indians had tried to make the whites live like them, the whites would have resisted. And it was the same way with many Indians. All right, folks. 23-hour break. We'll be back tomorrow. Have a good night.